Hello, everybody. Welcome to WD Carousel of Podcast. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian.
And today we are doing our March Women's History Month tribute. And we figured we would focus on the ink and paint department. And when we're talking about ink and paint, we are not just talking about the bar that happened to be in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Completely different thing.
I need to watch that movie again. It was so good.
It was so good. But, okay, so the ink and paint department is a department within Wells Fargo. My gosh.
Uh-oh.
Ooh, cutting that. A department within Walt Disney. There was a W there.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine.
You got it.
I'm not going to get into it. That really, when the studios were just beginning, was the only place that women were allowed to work.
Right.
And Disney was not the first place to have this. Disney was actually not the first place to come up with color on celluloids or film or anything. Color had been being applied to actual pictures and hand tinting.
Right.
For decades prior to Disney even being able to create a studio.
Right.
So it was still always almost primarily done by women, and it's because they thought that they had a more delicate touch, men, big labor, hulking, versus women who had the delicate touch of being able to use just a few hairs on a brush to be able to tint these photographs and like early, film recording of live movies, you know, the Edison theater system and all of that.
Ink over original negatives. Yeah.
They would tint the back of all of those negatives, but when it went into cartooning, it wasn't something that was very often done, primarily because a lot of the animation was still done on paper, and it took a while for them to figure out how to get from paper into a format that they could manipulate a little bit easier. Grayscale was a big thing at that time too, and that was a big advance to be able to add depth and dimension to the individual cartoons. And it was even before color became a thing that Disney started hiring females. That's where he met his wife Lillian. I mean, Lillian was one of the first original inkers that they had there, where animators would draw out something and then it would be an inker who would go through and hardline it. But before we get into this a little bit, I think it'd be a good idea to explain the process as it was for the majority of the 20th century up until we got into computer generated assistants and animation through there. But it pretty much stayed the same from when Disney first started animation all the way up until, the 90s.
Yeah, it was like the very first time was like 88, 89 that they even tried it.
But then it was just one little touch here, one little scene there.
Just to play with it. So it was
pretty consistent.
Pretty consistently the same technology. I mean, it was maybe the equipment got better, more efficient or whatever, but like the process didn't really change in that entire time. So, yeah.
So once you got a story, and let's just skip over all of that. And you figure out what you want. It becomes the job of the animator to create the actual image. And here I just have a sketch, I'm not sure if you can see it well, of Dumbo that, they give every time you go down to Disney and you go through Disney for a vacation. They give you just a little thank you sketch. But the animators would be the ones to figure out what the character was going to look like, movements, and lay out these general big movements. So you go from this move all the way to them being over here, that sort of thing. And then it went to in-betweeners and the cleaners, essentially, which also happened to include Floyd that we talked about before. He was an in-betweener for a while, where they would make the connecting sketches to go from movement A to movement B.
The key frames of an animation.
And then once that was all approved, then it would be put on these clear celluloid films and would go to the girls to be able to ink And so what they do is they take the actual paper sketch, put the clear plastic over top or the celluloid over top, and then draw out every single line that was the primary line on a sketch, even though you might see other lines on there for, face positioning and body structure. They would go through and they would hand do every single line to make that character stand out, and then it would go to the paint department that would then color it.
Right.
And really, for many, many years, the girls were almost looked down on for their work.
Right. Which is unbelievable, because if you really think about this process, you've got these guys that are sketching out, yeah, man, we're making these sketches, and then they pass it on to the people that actually have to do the artwork. I mean, not to say that an animator doesn't do artwork, because they do, but these people are doing, these women are doing, actual full, paintings, basically. These little, I mean, obviously it's just part of the character part, but they're doing this over and over and over again. It has to be consistent, and it has to be, put together in a way that it makes sense, and that you can't just blindly follow it, because they have to make a lot of decisions on their own. And it's amazing. I mean, you see the kind of material that came out, that's what you're looking at is what the women did, not what the men did.
And when you're thinking about when they started, the project Snow White. Snow White was their first big main color, first main project whatsoever, but they also included that in color. They didn't have enough color pigments created when they first started, that girls were literally using their personal blushes to be able to put the blush in her cheeks, to be able to add that little rosiness.
Right.
And by the time that they got done, I heard they had made over 1,500 pigments in different colors just for that movie alone, to create all of those nuanced color tones, because they knew that, okay, there was going to be a little bit of shadow here, a little bit of shading was needed here, a little bit of a fold here would lead to this color, or sunshine brightness would lead to this color.
Right.
And then they also had to do it at a speed fast enough where you could get all those details in there, but that you wouldn't see the brush strokes. Because if you did it too slow, the paint would dry, and then you could potentially see those brush strokes through the clear film.
Right.
And that could throw a flicker into the image and throw off the magic behind the movie that they were creating. If you didn't have uniformity through everything, it was going to be a very glaring, obvious mistake.
Right.
So these women had to be so detail-oriented and so specific, which is why if you're watching old movies and you see, going back to the Thomas Edison movies, and you see that they had used some tinting, and then there'd be a little flicker of one film might have been slightly lighter than the other one or whatever. It's obvious. But then with Disney, you don't notice that at all.
It's just, it looks very smooth and bright and clean the whole time, and that's literally the work of the inkers. That's, entirely the work of the inkers that they were able to get that done.
Girls.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And they only hired girls normally below 25, small hands, small attention to detail, not married normally. But also because of that, it was often referred to in salacious sort of connotations when it came to the other men in the studio. It was the stinkers and fainters, not inkers and painters.
Oh, God.
Or it was also referred to as the nunnery for the girls who didn't have any interest whatsoever in all of these boys.
Oh, God.
It was best suited for women, tedious and detailed work, It's just not something that they do. They're just pretty girls who trace in color. And I thought it was very degrading to just knock it down to a
coloring book.
Yeah. It's not a coloring book. It's not, paint by numbers at home. This is something that they had to create. And for the first award that Disney really got with, Flowers and Trees, because of the color, would Disney have gotten that award if not for the girls in the ink and paint department?
No, there's no way he would have. It's just, it's amazing to me that they're looked down upon in a way that, but because they are, and in a way it kind of makes sense why they could be singled out, because, not only because they're women, which that can be, obviously is a problem, but also, the other problem is they are basically, besides the master color camera, they are the last step between a story going to print. So if it's one of those deals where, it's if the animator doesn't like something about what he did, even if it doesn't look good on the other end, who do you blame? Well, the last person.
Oh, yeah.
Before it ends up at the master camera, which is just, it's a bummer. It shouldn't be like that.
They got blamed a lot for diluting an animator's work or
mean?
homogenizing. And I think that's ridiculous because there are so many additional steps in between when you get the original sketch from an animator to the point of it being, filmed and recorded on camera, for them to single out and be like, oh, it was that one group right there. They're the ones to blame for all of this. It doesn't make sense at all. It really doesn't.
No.
But at that time, most women didn't complain too much because what were their choices? Their choices were either secretarial work, either going into the factories, cloth factories or any of that. And so it gave them decent pay and an entry-level position in Hollywood.
Right, absolutely.
So it got them in the door, which is something that a lot of people appreciated and took advantage of.
Right.
But everything went through the ink and paint department.
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, it's
not just the big films. When you think about the sheer number of celluloids these women touched, you think about, okay, so an animator, once they're done with a movie, they might take a movie off or they might have a little break. These girls are still just plowing through everything.
It's like they've taken something that's extraordinarily artistic and detailed, being able to interpret all this stuff and make it work, and then you're expected to do it on like a factory-like scale. It's to look at it, truly look at the process has been hard for me to wrap my head around, because I would it'd go insane. Like, I don't even know how it would work.
You think about, okay, so they have the primary moneymaker movies, so the big productions right there, the special effects for the live-action features, like Mary Poppins, Pete's Dragon, all of those, the educational films that Disney did, the commercials that Disney was part of, the television segments that Disney was part of, all of the cartoons that they still did for the shorts of Mickey and Minnie. Everything passed through that department, and it wasn't like the girls were like, okay, I'm done with Snow White, I'm going to go take a week off. No, they would just keep going. And they never got credit. For many, 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 many movies, they never got credit.
Is there a point at which they got credit?
Yes, eventually they started getting credit. In fact, it was a good stepping stone for a lot of the big name artists that we know. I mean, we've brought up the 9 Old Men before, but there were women that were just as important and just as powerful in there that worked their way up through the ink and paint department at the same time that those 9 Old Men were creating all of these masterpieces. So you're talking about Rita Scott, who was the first woman to animate at Disney. And she did Bambi, and she's also the first one to receive a screen credit.
Okay.
So, Bambi, not too bad.
Right.
But, she had to work up to it. Bianca, I'm going to botch this, Majoli was the first woman hired by Disney for the story department. Okay. But that was the story department. That wasn't...
That was prior to animation.
And that was Pinocchio. And then Sylvia... Mobley Holland was the second to be hired for story. And then the other big one is Mary Blair, and we've brought her up before many times. She's the one that we talked about, the mosaic in the contemporary. Yeah. But she's one of the most influential artists at in Disney history. Yeah. Because she did animation and everything too. And these girls worked up essentially from the ink and paint department and were able to show that they were able to take it do more than just color.
Right. Well, get your coloring books and do that. It's just,
And, I mean, it's amazing to think about the amount of work that went in and how many people, how many girls worked in just the ink and paint department alone. They said in this documentary that we were watching, what was it? What was the name of the documentary? It was a walk through Walt Disney Studios. Yep. And they said that there were 120 women that were just in that one department alone working on that film. And to be able to keep it uniform, be able to keep the coloring correct, the line work correct.
Right.
And all of that is mind-boggling. It wasn't like they had,
crazy.
One person for one character like they did with animators. You had to be versatile.
Right. Yeah, that was the other thing, too. To me, the thing that really just amazes me about it is, not only was there the scale that they had to put through, which is impressive enough, it really wasn't just, like, color books. I mean, it was really, truly, like, deep, detailed artistry that they had to take care of quickly and on scale, and it was like commercial art. It's just something that I can't even.
And they had to create most of
fathom.
it too. They had to come up with the way to build these colors,
Yes.
to build these pigments, to get that feeling across. Those subtle hues that
Yeah.
maybe men can't see, or I don't
Right,
know
right.
whatever excuse they were going to provide at that point in time.
Oh, yeah.
But they were engineers, they were scientists having to create chemical compounds.
Right,
They were
right.
artists. They were all of these really intelligent, hardworking women that were denigrated to just coloring in little pictures.
Right.
And we wouldn't be where we are with Disney without them.
Without them.
They finally, like I said, eventually, and I don't have the year, started giving credit to the people in the ink and paint department.
Okay.
But I think at first it was just a mention, to the ink and paint girls, and then eventually they started maybe listing top people or
Like
that
the
sort
top
of thing.
department people.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's not something that they really were listing all 120 women that could have been working on that project all at the same time.
Jeez. Wow. Yeah, it's. I tip my hat if I was wearing a hat. That's an amazing feat that definitely does not get enough credit, because people don't really know necessarily what the process is for animation. The fact that, like, when you talk about an animator is literally just drawing out the sketches of the characters in keyframe, and there's an entire crew of people that are doing
After them.
doing, or concurrently doing backdrops, or doing the in-betweeners of everything, then they have to go in and do all the illustration, the color and paint. It's just amazing.
And I was joking with you about when we were watching that documentary how they were like, they talked about the girls, but they talked about the girls in the more of a, they have their own air-conditioned building and blah, 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 blah. But then, this one person's been focusing on this one background picture for 3 months to get the details right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, honestly, that's one picture. How many have these women been pumping through to make them just as pristine?
Right.
And just on the same scale and the same level. Because if you had someone who's a Rembrandt doing, the background work, and then just have me doing finger paints up front, you will definitely be able to tell the difference.
Just like the little hand turkey coming across the Monet in the back. It needs to match up, and the fact that they were being able to kick it out in a way
And
that
turn it out.
that matched these amazing, huge watercolor backdrops, and no one questioned it.
They took 3 months for that background, versus these women that were just being able to have the fluidity and change and really humanize and personalize these characters to us.
It's incredible. It's an amazing feat, and I am continually impressed that they were able to do it. That anyone was able to take care of it that long, because now no one does that.
No,
It's not a job anymore.
it was honestly too hard.
Yeah.
At the end, it was getting. I mean, they had streamlined things. They had figured out millions of colors by that point in time. They had their process down. But one of the reasons why they probably started going, and this is just me hypothesizing because I'm not in movies whatsoever, but I could totally see one of the pulls towards digital animation was just to be able to streamline the color process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And streamline the, actual inking process, because then once you get that image in there, you can move him how you want and he stays that image.
Right.
And same with the coloring, and so then you just play with shadow or with lights, and then it automatically puts those shadows in and those shade colors in, so you don't have to come up with it yourself. And so it doesn't look weird if you have a little bit too light of a purple where shadow should be, where it should be a little bit more blue. You're not going to have to take that on yourself.
Right.
But these women were able to handle that, and you didn't even notice.
Right. They did the work of a computer So they had to build for decades to build a computer that could handle what these women did.
Well, and this isn't the only place where women were computers either.
This is true. This is true.
This is very true.
This is very true.
Women were the first computers.
Weird tidbits on Carousel Podcast.
Yeah. Like, literally, I'm just gonna say this, the people who actually used to do math were called computers. And then they just stole the name when they made a machine called a computer. So it's not an original name. They stole the name from a women's group. And here it's just, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah.
But
absolutely.
These women earn just as much credit and should have just as much recognition as the animators, as the storytellers, as, everybody in the process.
Yeah.
And there's a great book out there that's all about the women from the ink and paint department. I was going to bring it today, but with it being so drenching raining out today, I didn't want to get it wet, so I don't have it with me. But it is a beautiful book, heavily pictured, so you can see what the process looked like.
Right.
They have individual stories of the women that actually worked there, managers. Wow. Lots and lots of individual stories from Walt talking about how women inspired his life and his decisions, and how he really connected with the women that he had in his world. Yeah. And it's just an amazing book. I highly recommend that you get it. It is a coffee table size book. It's pretty large, so it's not something you can, throw in your purse for light reading, but it is an amazing book, and I recommend reading it. Again, we watched the walk through
Disney Studios or something like that.
Yeah, and that was on Mouse Files.
Yeah.
But there's not really too much out there. Most of the stuff that I was seeing reference either the book or the Walt Disney Family Museum out in San Francisco.
Sure.
So that talked about it more, but there's not a lot out there for the women, and that's one of the first things that I read about in the book that was created. I even went so far as I was reading a college thesis that was written on this, where they're like, it was hard for me to find this information. And that's where I found that documentary.
Okay.
So I wanted to catch that little snippet, but it's like the information on these women is so sparse.
Interesting.
Because it wasn't a big thing.
It wasn't a big thing. Yeah, they had their air-conditioned building that was dedicated for them, so there you go.
Yeah, the nunnery.
The nunnery. Oh, God. Wow.
So thank you so much to all those women who have put in your time and your effort to really create the beautiful art that we have been loving for the last century.
Yeah.
At this point in time, it's almost a century.
Almost a century. Yeah. It's incredible.
And with that, this has been WD Carousel of Podcast. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian.
And I hope you all have a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.